Well, I'm joined by Andrew Marr in the studio now, LBC presenter, most of the week, Monday to Thursday from 6 o'clock, as you well know. Andrew, how long has she got?
I think if she doesn't go today, they'll get her out next week or the week after. The choice is to go today with dignity, in her own words, on her own terms, or be pulled out in a much more humiliating fashion later.
And this press conference at 2:30, that is, I guess, an opportunity for her to do that.
It would be an opportunity.
But there are other options available to her, aren't there? And she'll probably take those.
Well, there certainly are. I mean, we're hearing right now that she's appointing Jeremy Hunt as her new Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, Jeremy Hunt is very much on the opposite wing of the Conservative Party to her. He would not share any of her sort of core economic views about growth and unfunded tax cuts or anything like that. So it is the most radical message she could send to the markets about change. I've changed my mind. I've got it wrong. I'm U-turning on the whole thing.
The anti-Quasi candidate.
He is the anti-Quasi Chancellor. The other thing I would say about it, now I think she's toast, but if she's not toast, I think what she's doing is she is, as it were, listening to the plotters who are moving against her at the moment. And their idea was assemble a kind of shadow cabinet, a shadow Tory cabinet, reaching out to all parts of the party, and then go in and tell her it's over and replace her with a kind of emergency Conservative cabinet which looks in all directions inside the Conservative Party. And in that, you would very likely have seen Jeremy Hunt being there. So perhaps she's trying to preempt it by doing it herself, as it were, creating a non-trust or even an anti-trust cabinet under Liz Truss.
And the people will say, well, why didn't she have the sense to do that in the first place? And if she didn't have the sense to do that in the first place, why is she there in the first place?
She's a rigid thinker. Some people would say that means she's a principled thinker, but she's not somebody who listens to much advice from the outside. She wouldn't be in this position if she was. And I think what's happened is that, over the course of the last few weeks, people have been saying to her again and again and again, this is not going to sustain. You can't fight the markets. You can't fight the markets. And she's thought, I don't know what she's thought. She's thought she can't. But what we have to say today is if you get rid of your mini budget, that means you've got rid of your growth strategy. If you get rid of your growth strategy and the Chancellor, who was your front person, because they were joined at the hip on this stuff.
Who are you, anyway?
Then there is it's not that she hasn't got a programme or that she hasn't got an agenda. I would say at this moment, she hasn't got a purpose in government at all.
Whatever happens in the days that you've described, the days ahead, either a resignation today or kicked out by the middle of the next week, however it works. What about our politics after that? What about the governance of this country after that? So
it seems to me there are, broadly speaking, two possibilities. Well, there are three, but the third one is a general election sooner. I think that is unlikely because the Conservatives would be effectively wiped out at this stage. So I think it's either a sort of completely different kind of what I would call an emergency cabinet or an emergency government of the best people they can assemble from inside the Conservative Party in Parliament to try to get the country through the next couple of years, try to get us through the next phase of the Ukraine war, get us through the turmoil in the markets, inflation, the energy crisis. And if she was really going to do that, and if she had any chance of staying, and I think it's remote, then she would have to bring in not just Jeremy Hunt, she'd have to bring in all the kind of clever people around government who've been left. William Hague could come back, for instance. Why? He's a young man. Maybe bring George Osborne back in from put him into the Lords, bring him back. She'd have to reach out to all the talent that the Conservative Party has lost from government. She'd bring back Johnsonites, even Johnson. Who knows?
That sounds like a lot of effort for an almost inevitable general election defeat in the end.
It does. A vast, vast plate of humble pie with grovel sauce to be eaten at speed over the next few days. And it's unlikely for that reason.
Yes.
And also, a lot of those people think, hold on a second, why would I go into this SHIT storm when I've got a perfectly nice life outside? Why would I put myself through this? And they wouldn't be wrong. So that's one alternative. The other alternative is that she tries to hold together a Liz Truss government with no purpose. It would effectively be a paralysed government because there's not much you can get through the House of Commons at the moment. And we limp ahead for 2 years. I think that is a hideous, ghastly prospect for the country.
Something like what we saw with Theresa May in 2019 over Brexit.
But for longer, Sheila. I mean, it strikes me that we meet across this very fine studio table on rare occasions. We were last talking on the occasion of the death of the Queen. We're now talking on the occasion of the death of a government.
Wow. And it was not just this iteration of the Conservative government, but perhaps everyone since 2016. Has their politics, because of the way the party has changed since then, just been built on sand? Are we seeing that sand just collapse underneath them?
I think it's the lure of extreme thought, the lure of ideology. And you see it on the left of politics at times as well as the right. People think, well, if only we were purer.
Simple answers.
If only we were more extreme. If we got away from all these complicated, irritating diplomats and civil servants and experts who keep telling us it's more complicated than we think. And just cut through. Well, life is complicated. The modern economy is very complicated, and you can't just take a machete to it. And I think it's that kind of simplistic thinking. And I think what really went wrong is when Liz Truss was talking to the Conservative members, and they were in a pretty hacked-off mood already at that point, because they were thinking about the fall of Boris Johnson. They were suspicious. They may not be the most sophisticated electorate in the world. And she gave them a very, very simple gospel. And they heard this incredibly simple political gospel and went for it.
But she believed that gospel. And so does Kwasi Kwarteng,
yes,
judging by that letter.
There's a small group of people who really believe it. I'm going to try and fish out from my phone the letter, because there's one line, if I can find it, that really struck me about it.
Well, while you do that, Theo has come into the studio for some reason, Theo. I know what, but I can imagine it's with breaking news. You look for the letter, you tell me what you've got there, Theo.
Let me just get this microphone to stay in position, because we do have, talking of letters, we've got a letter now from the Prime Minister to Kwasi Kwarteng saying, thanks for your letter. Obviously, that's the resignation letter. As a long-standing friend and colleague, I'm deeply sorry to lose you from the government. We share the same vision for our country and the same firm conviction to go for growth. You've been a Chancellor in extraordinarily challenging times in the face of severe global headwinds. She goes on to talk about the energy price guarantee and the energy bill relief scheme, which made up, as she put it, the Prime Minister puts it in her letter, the largest part of the mini-budget, and will be one of the most significant fiscal interventions in modern times. She says you've cut taxes for working people by legislating this week to scrap the increase in the national insurance contributions. You've set in train an ambitious set of supply-side reforms.
It's totally disassociated from reality.
They've set it in train, Andrew. So it may not be happening, but it's in train. That this government will proudly take forward. These include new investment zones to unleash the potential parts of our country that have been held back for too long, and the removal of EU regulations to help British businesses succeed in the global economy.
I sacked you even though you were
right.
No,
but she doesn't, of course, mention the U-turn that's coming in the next 40 minutes, 50 minutes or so, which is on corporation tax.
At any point, does the word sorry or apologise appear at all, Theo?
No. I deeply respect the decision you've taken today.
Oh.
You've put the national interest first?
No, she made him do that.
So putting the national interest first means leaving office and you turning on the central policy. There's only one sentence that I would take issue with in Kwasi Kwarteng's resignation letter, which is very generous, very nice to her. There's not a shred of bitterness, and tip of the hat to him for that. But he says, the economic environment has changed rapidly since we set out the growth plan on the 23rd of September. No, the economic environment has changed rapidly because we set out the growth plan.
Exactly.
That's the only thing I would
but
emphasize.
both of them are still denying that in every utterance, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
There was also, sorry, Sheila, I was just going to say, there was also quite a dig in that letter from Kwasi to Kwarteng to the Prime Minister, in which he talked about her ambitions, and referring to Liz Truss as this was what you wanted to happen, rather than the record, of course, which is what the point that Kwasi Kwarteng might feel slightly bitter about, is that Liz Truss is trying to make it out that it was all his idea.
And can I get your thoughts, Andrew, on, you mentioned there that the third and least likely option of those you were going through is a general election. Yeah. Now, you see, I have a sort of heebie-jeebie about that. I think there might be one, and I wouldn't rule it out. So I don't mean this year necessarily, imminently, but the people are exhausted. The people I talk to every day on this programme are exhausted with this. And Theo made the point earlier on, a third leader placed into the role of Prime Minister with, sort of upending failure at all turns.
And what manifesto?
Yeah. And what mandate? And you wonder whether any subsequent leader, particularly if he or she is just placed there, can actually really properly function and maybe for the good of the country, even though they know they'll lose in all likelihood, that actually is the healthiest thing that we could do, is have a general election.
I don't know if it's weird or creepy to say that I share your heebie-jeebies.
Oh, do you?
I do, but without being able to really rationalise it.
Yeah.
Because you're quite right, it would be the healthiest thing, a cleansing general election and a new government with a new agenda which had actually been voted for by the British people. And then, by the way, the international markets who have driven this whole thing, and we're going to be watching them like hawks in the later part of this afternoon again. The international markets would understand the one thing they really want to know: is there a government properly in control with a kind of medium to long-term agenda that can do sums?
But we want to know that as well.
We want to know
don't
that, but the markets would know that.
Yeah.
The question is, do Conservative MPs, who still have all the status and to a certain extent the monetary reward of being an MP and are still taken seriously and are interviewed, do they want to give all that up very, very quickly, knowing that as the polls stand right now, they would be slaughtered in an election? Or do they think, hold on a second, we've got Jeremy Hunt coming in, who knows who's next? Could we see a slightly different government with a different tone?
And lose fewer seats.
And lose fewer seats in due course. And I think the impulse for that will be very, very strong indeed, which is why I think in the end it's unlikely to happen, unless there is some kind of unpredictable, unpredicted parliamentary collapse or meltdown, possibly on a subject we're not even thinking about at the moment.
But she might, in effect, and I agree with Andrew, she in effect becomes a lamed up Prime Minister. Things are controlled very much within the Treasury and on the Conservative backbenches about what policies are acceptable and not acceptable. Liz Truss
Last among equals.
Liz Truss then continues in post, but not really in power. A consensus for any changes needs to be found. And this would be the strategy that you'd run through the next 2 years and hope that the economic situation is better than the one now. And rather than being, say, 30 points down by the time you go to the ballot box, you're only, say, 10 or 15, because at the moment the Conservative Party faces an existential threat of going below 100 seats.
And just to jump in there with you, the difference between that is a Conservative Party which suffers a damaging defeat and is not in opposition for 5 or 10 years, and a Conservative Party so smashed and splintered it never recovers. That's what they're looking at.
We've had this conversation over the years about Labour recently as well, haven't we? Whether it was over for Labour after the Miliband years, after the Corbyn years, and
and we're all buying shares in Keir Starmer right now, are we not? He no longer looks so dull and grey and dreary.
People want a bit of dull, I think.
But you don't get back if you see, as Andrew says, a Conservative Party that say is smashed down to 60 odd seats. That was one YouGov poll a couple of weeks ago.
One poll said 3 seats. 3 seats. I mean, ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean that's existential. But let's say you go down to 60, 70 seats, you don't get that back in one electoral cycle. You don't necessarily get that back in 2. You'd have to wait for half a generation, 10, 15 years before you can even contemplate a Conservative government being in power again. And that's what they want to avoid. Conservative MPs want to avoid
Not
happening.
all of them, because Isabel Hardman, as I mentioned earlier on Question Time last night, said some Conservative MPs she's been speaking to, the Westminster journalist Isabel Hardman, are saying to her, we need a period in opposition. We're an exhausted party. Is that performative?
Yes, and of course, they're only human, and some of them are absolutely so depressed they're almost deranged as they look ahead. So, of course, some people will feel like that. Yes, it's spreading, it's catching. Help.